What I'd love to do is introduce you to our November speaker, and her name is Aparna. And I met Aparna a few years ago when she was going through accredited Kanban consultant process, and I was asked to give her essay a little bit of a glance through. And ever since then, I've loved working with her. She's a upholding member of the Kanban community. She's now part of the team that runs the AKC community. She's always coming up with new, fresh ideas and trying things. And actually, the thing that I really admire about her is the time that she actually gives up for people. And that's because there's a lots of people that want to learn about Kanban, and she dedicates her time to giving them coaching, mentoring, and support, especially through that AKC program. So I would love to introduce and hand you over to Aparna. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Helen. And I hope you all can hear me. If you need me to switch to a headphones, I can do that very quickly. So that's it. I am Aparna, and I am part of the business transformation team, and I'm helping American National with their agile adoption. So that's what I'm doing as a full-time job. But as Helen mentioned, I love Kanban and I love learning with you all. So I'm really looking forward to a very interactive session. So without too much time going over who I am, let's get started on the leadership development. So let me see if I can share my screen properly. Desktop 2. Okay, I hope you're all seeing my screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm hoping this is going to be a very interactive kind of a session. So feel free to jump right in and share some of your experiences and your stories. That's what we're going to be discussing about in some ways as we are going through. Sorry, my internet is a little bit unstable. If it stops sharing and you're all able to see, give me sign on your, okay, I see a thumbs up. Cool. So let's get started. So feel free to jump right in and share your experiences, please, and your stories. I'll come back to this shortly, but I bet most of you are all wondering when it comes to leadership, right? And when we talk about leaders, we often talk about CEOs, we often talk about army generals, we all often talk about political leaders. And you may be wondering, well, I don't have that kind of authority. I don't know how I can make that kind of a difference. Well, let me share the story of somebody whom I have looked up to for a very long time. The story of Florence Nightingale, right? Since most of you are all from Europe, I don't think I have to introduce her to you at all, right? To me, she is a very powerful example of a leader because she was not the queen of England, right? She was not some kind of a high-ranking government official, but she became the unofficial patron saint. She was the only non-royal woman to even have appeared in English banknotes until, I think, early 21st century, perhaps. But the thing is, if you ask somebody to describe Florence Nightingale, and in fact, the Illustrated Times actually describes her as a ministering angel without exaggeration in these hospitals, and as her slender form glides quietly along each corridor, every poor fellow's face softens with gratitude at the sight of her. Right? And this is not the part of the story that I want to discuss about. I am going to actually discuss more about the fact that she was the first woman to be made a fellow of the Royal Statistical Society. Right? So one of the things that she was doing when she was not busy gliding along the corridors was that she was spending quite a lot of her time in Scutari, where she was compiling a lot of data about diseases and death, right? And what she saw actually kind of inspired her to actually make such a lot of change about how British Army actually treated their soldiers. So this is where she actually worked with a lot of statisticians, including William Farr. And in one of the letters that she writes to William Farr, she actually says, "You are complaining that your report is dry. Drier is actually better. Statistics should be the driest of reading." And she keeps talking and saying that we have to focus more on facts, right? Facta, facta, facta. That's what she keeps mentioning in that letter to Farr, and that we want facts, right? And that is the head of all statistical work she mentions. The reason I'm talking about this story is because she was the first person to come up with this idea of Rose diagram, a way of actually pulling it all together in an infographics kind of a form and laying out the evidence that makes people want to take actions. And we all are actually having a much better healthcare in our society today, thanks to her efforts. So imagine you don't have to be a CEO, you don't have to be somebody with positional authority to be a great leader and ensure that we can evolve the organization we are in, evolve the society that we are part of. So to me, she is the best brand ambassador that can ever represent Kanban in some ways, right? Because pretty much every action that she takes, including the fact that she thinks about whom she's going to be presenting with, whether to actually give all kinds of data and all kinds of bar charts. She comes up with a new way of understanding who the audience is, understanding what the context is, and being as pragmatic as possible, providing actionable evidence-based guidance. And that is our KU mantra. And I thought we'll start off with her story. Having started off with her story, I would love for us to discuss about some of the leaders whom you're all working with in your organization today. And I would love for us to talk about the kind of leadership maturity level you're all seeing in your organization. So let's talk about some of the stories, and also let's discuss together what are all the different leadership maturity levels there are in Kanban. How many of you here are quite aware and understand about the Kanban maturity model? A show of hands, please. Okay, there are many of you who've raised up your hand and a few who haven't. So very quickly, let me run you all through what KMM is. And on a side note, I also forwarded this meetup invite to my fellow students at IIT and Golden Gate University. So they are quite new to Kanban maturity model, by the way. I am doing my DBA on generative AI and emerging technologies. So I just thought, okay, this will be a great way to excite them about what I'm doing as well and learn with them. So very, very quickly, let's talk a little bit about KMM. So to me, this KMM model, you're all seeing my screen here, right? And it does show you KMM. Yeah, the outcomes and the benefits, cool. So KMM to me is all about building trust and improving the resilience in the organization, as you all can see here. And also, it's about building new capabilities in your organization, right? So you can all see that there are different levels to this organizational maturity, from 0 all the way till 6, right? So there are these 7 levels where your level 0 represents oblivious and level 6 is all about built for survival, right? As you're going deeper in your organizational maturity, you're going to start to see that the trust level in your organization increases from individual to product services to brand enterprise. You all can see this, right? And you're starting to see how the trust level also continues to increase. And also, you will start to notice that the behavior in your organization also changes quite a bit as you're going deeper. In your level 0, it's very individualistic, where you don't have a lot of organizational structure, there isn't a lot of cohesion. In fact, there isn't a lot of leadership either, right? If you do see any kind of leadership, it's essentially abdication. So to me, I mean, coming from Europe, and it's such a beautiful word in some ways. What does the word abdication mean to you all? Anybody have any examples to share? Any stories to share about this idea of abdication?
Well, it would be abdicate the throne. Edward
Yes,
VIII, most famously.
absolutely.
Abdicate responsibility.
Perfect, beautiful, right? So in that instance, when Edward the Eighth actually abdicated the throne, you still see that he was very authentic to who he was. So when you see this space here about abdicated, the leadership character traits that you would see still here is still authentic. The leader might have abdicated his responsibility as a leader, but he continued to be authentic to who he was, and he wanted to have a loving relationship, and he abdicated the throne, right? It's a beautiful story. Thanks for sharing that idea and that example. Anybody else with any other story? Think about certain leaders whom you're working with. Are you starting to see that they don't actually take any kind of decisions? They kind of shy away from making decisions. Any kind of stories that you all have to share with us? Please feel free to jump in. Okay, I will go through some of our leadership maturity levels and the KMM organizational maturity levels, and let's discuss a few more stories, right? Level 1, level 2, it's more tribal in nature, right? You kind of see some tribal behavior. This where your level 0 was all about who I am. Your level 1 and 2, you will start to see more about who we are, right? It can be about who we are as a team. It can even be about who we are as an organization. Going beyond teams to organization is where maturity level 2 is, team focused versus customer driven, but it's still very identity focused in some ways, the leadership style, right? So this is where, what comes to mind very often is this Star Trek, this character, Dr. McCoy. He keeps saying something, those sentences like, damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not a mechanic, right? So you have that kind of a identity about who you are, and you try to like stay, you try to only like, focus on who you are and what you're like really good at, and you want to only stick to that. You are not venturing beyond the boundaries you've like drawn for yourself in some ways, right? And that to me is the kind of leadership you would typically see in a level 1, level 2 kind of a space, right? So as you're going deeper in your organizational maturity, right, in these lower levels of maturity, it's quite a fragile kind of a resilience, right? It's a fragile organization in some ways. It's not quite fit for purpose yet. But as you're going deeper in the organizational maturity, where you are going into the realm of maturity level 3, or where you're truly fit for purpose in some ways, from there on, you see something change in who you are as an organization, right? Rather than being very reactionary in your actions as you were when you were lower in your maturity, you get a little bit better. You get more anticipatory. Your actions are more aligned, more explainable. You get a whole lot more resilient, and more importantly, more fit for purpose. Right. And Fit for Purpose is an amazing book. If you haven't checked it out already, please do check it out. Alexei Ziglov. Fernando here is Heart of the Squirrel North, and it's a brilliant book. And it's right there behind me. So coming back to this idea of fit for purpose, right? It is purpose driven. That means your organization now is in a realm where they have a more shared sense of purpose. You will see greater levels of alignment in your organization, and you're having greater alignment in terms of your strategy. You have greater alignment even in terms of your identity with what your core values are. You see that your actions become more anticipatory in nature, right? So you are going beyond just operational, and you're also going to be better in terms of the way you handle your operational work, and your strategy is more aligned, right? So from a place where you were very chaotic, you are going to a place where your actions are more explainable and more congruent. So that's your leadership maturity model in some ways. And if you're starting to see your leadership maturity levels also, they kind of change from abdicated, selfish, and tribal to a place where they get a whole lot more altruistic in some ways. So this is where you see different characteristic traits. No matter what kind of leaders you see in the organization, the one thing that I would say is there is no such thing as a leader who's not authentic. Otherwise, they will not remain a leader for long. So let's talk about this value of authenticity. But even before that, let's hear some of your ideas about what kind of characteristic traits would you find in leaders? Just pop up with even one word answers. That's completely fine.
Empathy. Do you want us to
Yes,
put it on the
beautiful.
board, or yeah?
Empathy. What else?
I think inspiration, like, and also like not dictatorial, like somebody who can like help you to grow but not let you fail, can harness like the excellence in you, that kind of thing.
Confidence.
Yes, absolutely. Confidence.
I'm Aparna, for me, a leader is who knows the way and also um, go on that path to guide the other people in the same path. I mean, knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. So
You've got a few in the chat channel as well. Someone you want to follow, and Marco says inspiration.
Awesome. Yeah, Marco. Hey, Marco, by the way, I'm so happy to see you here. So, amazing characteristic traits, right? Some of these leaders that you see here, like Walt Disney, Leonard Bernstein, Margaret Thatcher, Billy Bean, Bruce Lee, no matter who they are, the first thing that comes to our mind are things like inspirational, confidence, etc., right? You're seeing so many different types of leaders, and from so many different backgrounds, but the kind of words that you're all talking when you're talking about leaders are inspirational, confidence, authenticity, giving directions, knowing who they are, right? So this is a brilliant place for us to actually explore the ideas around this particular exercise here together. So I'll bring you all over to where I am. Okay. Bring everybody to me. It's been a while since I've used Miro because we've kind of shifted to Mural here in my organization. I'm like scrambling a bit over here. So, all right. So Anybody here with any experiences to share about level one kind of an organizational leader, right? Who tends to abdicate responsibility, but yes, maybe a little bit authentic to who he is. No? The kind of a poem that comes to mind when I'm like hearing this word abdicated and distancing yourself and not jumping right in and helping out is this poem where they said something about first they came for me, first they came for the socialists and I didn't speak out because I was not a socialist, right? And then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I was not a trade unionist, right? And then they came for the Jews. I didn't speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and then there was no one left to speak for me, right? That kind of tells you a little bit about abdicated. And in modern times, if you guys read about Jimmy Kane, the CEO of Bear Stearns, he said something like, the only people who are going to be suffering are my hairs, right? Not me. So that was his style of leadership. He was the CEO, and when 2008, the financial crisis hit, this was him saying that, right? So think about it. When you have such kind of organizational leaders, what happens to your organization, in fact, right? So as amazing as the Kanban leadership maturity levels are, I do want you all to understand that whenever we talk about this kind of leadership itself, it's very contextual and it's very dynamic. And it's not something that's very formulaic in some ways. We are trying to codify leadership so that you can actually develop your leaders, right? We try and take a very pragmatic approach when it comes to leadership development, just like any other brand essence. So level 0 leaders, quite hard to develop, but from level 1 onwards, somebody who shows a little bit of confidence, who is there. I still remember David's story from the Change Leadership Masterclass. He said, give the football to somebody who is confident and has the skill. He's going to just go ahead and get started with it and start playing, right? So you will follow a leader who is confident. And that's why I was thrilled when I heard the word confident come from you all about that being one of the key leadership traits, right? So you can develop leaders from level 1 to becoming level 5, level 6 leaders. And that's where Kanban leadership is all about in some ways. You have a little bit of stress in your environment over here where different folks are saying things like, hey, I'm stuck, I'm too busy, I'm idle, right? And that's where the magic formula for evolutionary change starts, where there is a little bit of stress in your environment. And all of these discussions are happening. That means there's some kind of a reflection mechanism happening right there, right? And then your active leadership catalyzes it all, right? In fact, if this person was not saying, let's do something about it, what if he were to say something like, hey, let's get back to work? That would be an abdicating leader in some ways, right? So rather than saying, let's do something about it, what if it was somebody saying, let's get back to work? What happens to all of these folks who are sharing what stresses are happening and, what's actually going on, having that courage to share what's happening? So this is where you do need a leader who's ready to signal and say that let's do something about it. So Fernando, you have something to share. Go ahead.
So this is a joke that actually my colleague Martin Aziz came up with. So you can replace in that picture the let's do something about it with meh. And that's the abdicating leader. So we have all these problems, but yeah, let's go back to work, as we said. It's meh.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for sharing, Fernando. So let's get to a little bit more about level 1, team focus, a space where you never get the same results, you never do it the same way twice, right? You don't even have processes in order. You can't even expect to do the same thing twice and deliver something, right? So that's a space where you are reliant more on a hero to come save the day for you. So the level of maturity, level 1 right there, right? So this is a space where you see hero leaders start to emerge, right? You're so totally reliant on heroes coming in and saving the day. Sorry, this thing is switching off. My system's switching off. Sorry about that. So what kind of characteristics would you find in your organization when we are talking about these kind of hero leaders and level 1 kind of organizational maturity and level 1 leaders? If you have any examples to share, please go ahead, share it here with us.
Would it like where you've got like level 1, you've got selfish. So would somebody who in the category of basically takes all of the glory for themselves, would they come under that kind of like category?
Absolutely, yes. Any selfish leaders that you all want to like talk about? This is a great place to vent out if you all want to.
Well,
I was thinking, no, sorry, go on.
no, I was just going to say, you're probably not going to keep people for very long. I mean, especially if they feel they can get a job somewhere else. If you've managed to, as the selfish leader, undercut their confidence, they'll probably stay with you, but they'll probably be secretly stabbing you in the back in a voodoo doll or something. So,
yeah, absolutely.
He's probably they are probably the type of person who calls the team a family, but really are not. It's all about them.
yeah, exactly. It's not about them, it's all about me. Everything is all about me.
I was thinking Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, but I don't know if people would agree on it.
I'm thinking of somebody who was just elected president of a certain country, but I'm not mentioning any names.
You never know, he might have grown for his time in the wilderness.
+1.
I think the new president-elect is in 0 right now.
Yeah.
I think we're giving them too much if you put them in 1.
Yeah.
True that. But I would say it is quite, I mean, the confidence that he displays, very opportunistic kind of leaders. In fact, typically level 1 leaders are actually selfish, and they also tend to be narcissistic and manipulative. So typical example right there of our newly elected president. So if you're starting to see this kind of a behavior, you will realize that when you have level 1 kind of leaders, they tend to undermine the organizations in some way, or the countries that they are serving, or it could be the army that they are leading, right? So they do have a very strong kind of a sense of self and self-worth. But another great example of level 1 kind of a leadership that you would have seen is from William Boss Tweed, who the journalists actually kind of say that he was like astonishingly frank rascal. But if you're starting to hear his story about how he corrupted New York, it's just a fabulous kind of a read from General Stanley McChrystal's book, Leaders, Myth, and Reality. I may be wrong about the second part of the title, but it definitely is General Stanley McChrystal who wrote that book. Let me quote something for you all from that particular book, and it kind of illustrates why this is typically a level 1 kind of a leader. So it goes something like this, right? The Tweed's biographer, he actually says, Tweed, when there was like a huge crisis happening in New York, he actually was expected to act. So when the riots were going on, he jumped right in and he was seen on the street that day. He made the Tammany his club, and Tammany over the years had linked its fate to the same immigrants who were now tearing up the city. He was talking about the Irish immigrants who were like rioting. Many were his constituents. No one knew them better than Tweed and company. He was charismatic, and as a journalist points out, he was like an astonishingly frank rascal, right? But then Tweed actually is the guy who, back in 1871, he actually ensured that New York City ended up with $90 million of debt on their books. $90 million of debt. So imagine that's like the modern day equivalent of around 1.5 billion almost, right? So just Tweed and 3 of his cronies literally bankrupted the city within like 3 or 4 years. That's the scale of corruption. If you had to like think about the father of corruption, it would be William Boss Tweed. So coming back here, and of course, Zuma and the others, this is the picture of Jacob Zuma that David quite often talks about when he talks about leadership maturity levels, and how Zuma actually was also equally corrupt, and our Indian Gupta brothers actually lent a hand in his corruption. So coming back here to level 2 and charisma. So what is the difference, do you all think, between confidence versus charisma? How do you think that actually changes things, and what kind of a characteristic trait is charisma?
Got that little sparkle, able to help encourage people, get people friendly, open, likable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, charisma draws you in. Confidence you can appreciate, but it's kind of a little bit more distance.
They're good at bringing people together.
Yes, exactly. Charisma, they are very good at bringing people together.
They help inspire people to act.
Yes.
I find that charismatic people help you identify what's good about yourself, and they attract you magnetically. You lower your barrier and defenses, which makes you come out of yourself, paradoxically, come out of your shell much more because you feel safe. So you say more. So you end up contributing more. I find that. Yes. I don't know.
Brilliant. That's exactly right. So any stories about a maturity level 2 kind of leader that you all want to share? You remember?
I've had a leader who's very sort of, I like their approach in as much as they are very caring and charismatic. They can hold the room. And then if you have a one-to-one with that person, they'll focus the conversation about, what do you want to talk about today? Mm-hmm. And so that he or they put the agenda on you, that you're driving what it's about, rather than people coming to you with a preset agenda and that they're taking the lead. Very much your time in a one-to-one. It's about you, your personal growth, and you know where you're going.
Absolutely. Brilliant. But the thing is, if you're starting to see a charismatic leader, but who's not yet purpose driven, what happens is your level 2 leaders, anything lower than a level 3 kind of a leader, you will see that they are very tribal in nature, as we put it earlier. So it's a little bit better than who I am and being very selfish, but it is not quite purpose driven, right? So they tend to like sometimes make others look bad and take in the glory, as one of you mentioned earlier, right? So they tend to like make others look bad so that they will look kind of better in comparison, kind of a thing, right? So you will start to see these kind of leaders pop up quite often in organizations. And I can tell you that I still remember this organization I've worked with. He actually essentially justified this huge project, millions of dollars that we had like thrown out the door. He kind of justified it by how important that was, and kind of even held a huge party immediately after we had like a successful deployment, and organized it in a way that it made him look good in front of every executive in the organization. Anybody with stories like that, that's a classic example of a level 2 kind of a leader. Yeah. So we are now starting to see that these kind of maturity level leaders are actually in some ways the reason why your organization is sometimes stuck in the space where it is. Your organization may be a maturity level 2 organization in some ways because your organization's leaders are not quite mature themselves, right? Imagine if you've always been promoted because you were the hero who saved the day and you keep getting promoted for it, right? What kind of leadership would you see as you continue to grow as a leader? What happens if some parts of your organization already have a process that they can trust to deliver stuff? You don't need heroes there. Then what would happen if that hero leader has been promoted and he comes across a place where there is no heroic leadership needed there?
Well, they might change things because, do you know what I mean? Like, very often you get people that come in and they have to change because they've arrived, and
Yes.
it doesn't matter how good and robust the process already is. No, we're going to have a different one.
Exactly. So that you create artificial crisis just so that you can save the day, right? Because that's who you are. This is where I still remember David mentioning something about the firefighter turning arsonist, right? So if you have no fire to put out and you feel that your identity as a firefighter is no longer relevant, some of them turn into arsonists just so that they can like have that glory moment of putting out the fire and earning those kudos. Right. So this is where your organization's potential is sometimes limited by your leadership maturity. So this is where it is extremely important as coaches and as consultants to see how you can partner with your leader on their leadership development journey. I don't want to give out the entire change leadership masterclass, all of the details about how it goes down as you are like deepening the organization's maturity, as well as how you're developing them from this heroic leader into this altruistic side of the leader. But I will share with you all some of the things that we need to discuss about here before we wrap up for the day. I know I only have 9 more minutes left. So please remember that whenever we talk about this idea of leadership, again, reiterating, it is always contextual and it is dynamic, and it's not something that is formulaic that you think about, hey, all right, authenticity check, confidence check, charismatic check, and you keep moving down the line, right? And also leadership is predominantly an emergent property of a complex system, and it has a very rich feedback mechanism, and it's not one directional, it is always bi-directional. It's not always that leader coming in and changing everything. It is, if you think about one of the other leaders coming from, the European side of the world, and especially UK, Helen, you can add in your flavor here. Margaret Thatcher is an amazing example of a leader, right? During the time when she was the prime minister, she actually, somebody actually quoted saying that accounts of Thatcher's leadership during her premiership often implied that she led as though her hand was at the tiller of a ship, steering as she pleased. But Thatcher was less a hand on the tiller and more a star on the horizon, suggesting a general course to steer for a ship being buffeted by a stormy sea. She stood for a vision that was always kept blurry enough that it might just as well have been over the horizon, right? The thing is, as amazing as Thatcher's vision was, it would have been actually absolutely meaningless if there was no British parliamentary system in place, right? So it is not something that a leader does, or is so amazing that he or she accomplishes it all. It is about the system that supports her as well. And it was not just the system who supported her, it was also some of her closest supporters who actually played such a crucial part when she was the prime minister in some ways, right? It's not about the impact of one person. So whenever you're thinking about different styles of leadership, don't ever think about it in a singular time or at that particular time. It's also about the rest of the framework that was part of that story itself, right? So that context is often very necessary when you're talking about leadership in some ways. And another thing that I've realized over this journey in Kanban is that it's not just about how we distort the role of leaders. It's all about how, as humans, we all have this innate potential in some ways to sometimes tolerate, right, immoral and sometimes even incompetent leaders, because sometimes it's because we identify with them, right? So it is very, very important to understand that these kind of things happen very often because your social identity and who you are, all of that plays a very important part in some ways. So it's not something that you can take a very prescriptive approach to it in some ways. And leadership, again, I want to reiterate, is not glamorous. It's not quite straightforward. It's very perplexing. And I hope you all continue to keep deepening your understanding about how to develop leaders. Be very pragmatic, be very thoughtful in how you develop your leaders to be a little bit more altruistic, and start at a very young age. So to share a very quick story with you all, my kids, age 10 and 12, we actually came up with our definition of human values. We put together things such as truth, nonviolence. We came up with this list of 5 values that we've picked. And every time our actions and our behaviors are not quite incongruent, we have these character defining points and honorable character points, right? So it's about bringing about a level of congruence with your actions and behaviors, with your values, and go on this journey and ensure that you're not creating too much stress either as you are trying to develop them as future leaders, or developing existing leaders into level 5, level 6 leaders. Because when you're trying to change everything all at once, it's too stressful, and that's the space of overreaching in some ways. So make it an evolutionary journey, one practice at a time, one outcome, and always focus on the outcomes. And also don't forget to always lead with values. That's your KMM mantra, by the way, to lead with values and outcomes in mind. So I will stop here and ask if you all have any questions for me before we wrap up.
Aparna, I have a question. Have you ever observed any really great leaders, and what industry were they in?
Science. Mostly scientists are where I find great leadership in some ways. They are very authentic. My dad is a scientist, so I guess I'm a little bit partial towards that space. But think about it, like Albert Einstein, for example, even though Newton's laws F equals G into M1, M2 divided by R squared, this is a formula we learned as a child, right? And he comes up and says something like, hey, gravity is not actually a force, by the way. You have got to consider time, space, and motion as well. So the scientists, when they get very passionate and they are more authentic than any other field or industry that I've ever seen.